Welcome to another episode where we look at history and culture through the lens of beer. Today, we're going to travel from the pubs of Europe to the heart of Asia.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, we're going to explore how beer went from a drink dismissed as bitter horse piss
Wow.
to a symbol of modernity and a tool for, believe it or not, nation building.
That is fascinating. It really is more than just a story about beer, isn't it? It's about how global trade and even simple things like a drink can really shape a culture's tastes and perceptions.
Okay, so let's dive into this. We're talking about the 1800s. European powers are expanding their influence around the world. They brought their beer with them, of course. But, and this is where it gets interesting, different empires had wildly different experiences introducing beer to Asia.
Yeah, you're right. It's not as simple as you might think. For the British in India, beer was more about holding on to their British identity.
Right.
They weren't really concerned if Indians liked it or not. In fact, they even went so far as to raise taxes on imported beer to discourage Indians from drinking it.
Wow. Talk about a tough sell. So while we've got the Brits clinging to their pints, what are the other European powers doing?
Well, the Germans in China, now they took a completely different approach. When they set up a brewery in Qingdao in the early 1900s, they actually encouraged the Chinese to drink their beer. They saw it as a way to build relationships, maybe even foster a sense of shared culture.
So rather than keeping their distance, the Germans were kind of extending a hand, or I guess a glass, to the Chinese. Interesting.
And their approach, it wasn't just talk. Their marketing even had images of Germans and Chinese enjoying a beer together, like, as equals. They integrated schools. They even allowed intermarriage between Germans and Chinese in the colony.
Wow, a stark contrast to the British way of doing things.
Hmm.
Two different empires, two very different approaches to beer and empire. It makes you wonder how much those early strategies influenced how beer is perceived in those countries today. But before we get ahead of ourselves, we can't forget about the Japanese. They were going through their own period of modernization and expansion during this time too, right?
Absolutely. And their relationship with beer is, well, it's particularly fascinating because they actually started by taking inspiration from the Germans.
Oh, really?
Yeah, they hired German brewmasters, imported German ingredients. They really went all in on authenticity. But as they, gained confidence, they began experimenting, developing their own unique styles, and eventually becoming pioneers in beer technology and brewing trends.
So they used the German model as a stepping stone, but then went their own way and innovated.
Exactly. And this idea of taking something foreign and making it their own, it's something you see throughout Asia. While beer was initially brought in from elsewhere, it eventually became a way to express national identity, a source of local pride.
Which is a far cry from those early reactions to beer. Our research mentioned that some people, well, they weren't exactly thrilled with their first taste of European brews. In fact, there was a story about a Japanese official who compared it to, well,
Bitter horse piss.
that's the one. I mean, doesn't exactly make you want to crack open a cold one, does it? What led to such a harsh review?
Well, you have to remember that tastes, they're shaped by culture. What might seem appealing in one part of the world can be totally strange in another. For someone used to, let's say, the subtle flavors of sake, the bitterness of a European beer, well, it would have been a shock, maybe even offensive. And to be honest, those early European beers, especially the ones shipped to India, probably weren't very good. They had to go on long journeys.
Right.
In those days, the conditions, well, let's just say they weren't ideal, which definitely wouldn't have helped the taste.
So it's like judging pizza based on a soggy slice that's been sitting out all night. You're not getting the full intended experience.
Exactly. And back then, it wasn't just the taste. They had to overcome these preconceived notions, cultural associations.
And that's where marketing came in, right?
Yeah.
Create a new image for beer. Connect it with things like modernity, luxury, maybe even a little rebellion.
You got it. In Japan, they marketed beer as, get this, the beverage of the new era. Advertisements showed modern, cosmopolitan Japanese people enjoying beer, linking it with a progressive lifestyle. It was aspirational.
It wasn't just Japan, though, right?
Yeah.
Similar tactics in China, too. Brewers there, they really emphasize those locally sourced ingredients.
Oh, yeah, definitely. They really used Chinese imagery and language in their advertising, really wanted to hit home that sense of national identity.
Tapping into that sense of pride, showing that beer could be both modern and distinctly Chinese. It's really interesting how beer became this blank canvas for shaping perceptions, for kind of creating a new cultural identity. What about India, though? They have their own issues with national identity, obviously.
Mhm.
And from what we've talked about, maybe a little bit more of a complicated relationship with beer, right?
Definitely. India's relationship with beer, it's very unique. I mean, it gained popularity eventually, but it didn't have that same, maybe like overtly nationalistic feel as it did in places like China or Japan.
I wonder if that's because of Gandhi. He was pretty vocal about his views on alcohol, wasn't he?
Oh, absolutely. Gandhi saw alcohol, and that included beer, as a tool of colonial oppression, something that really, in his view, weakened the Indian people.
Hmm.
And while, his influence didn't lead to like complete prohibition, it definitely had an impact on how alcohol was viewed, especially in post-independence India.
So beer's journey in Asia is kind of like this tapestry, right? Woven together from these global trends, these local customs, and even the influence of these really strong, individual figures like Gandhi.
Yeah, it's true.
It's just, it's incredible to me how something as, seemingly simple as a drink can be so intertwined with history, with culture, with politics.
It makes you realize it's something we often take for granted. Just having a beer with friends can have this really rich and complex backstory.
Speaking of which, we've talked about the marketing, the cultural stuff, but what about the beer itself? Was it the same stuff that they were brewing back in Europe? Or did they have to make changes, for the climate, the local tastes?
That's a great question. And the answer is it's a little bit of both. So, at first, European brewers, they tried to stick with what they knew, replicating familiar styles. But they realized pretty quickly that some things needed to change, partly for practical reasons, but also to, appeal to local preferences.
I imagine brewing in a tropical climate, it couldn't have been easy.
You're telling me heat was a major, major challenge. I mean, it could ruin an entire batch. It could create off flavors, all sorts of problems. So brewers had to adapt. They had to get creative. Sometimes they would adjust their techniques. Other times they even built their breweries in cooler locations.
Like those British brewers who set up shop in the Himalayan foothills, right?
Yeah.
To escape that heat.
Exactly. They found that the climate there was perfect for making their traditional ales. But even with those changes, let's just say that those early European beers in Asia probably weren't winning any awards. Remember that horse piss comment?
Yeah.
There might have been some truth to that, at least for those first attempts.
So how did they bridge that gap? How did they go from horse piss to something people actually enjoyed and look forward to?
Well, it was a gradual process. It was driven by, new technologies and also a better understanding of what people wanted, those local preferences. For example, the development of refrigeration, pasteurization, that was a game changer. It made production more reliable, transportation as well. And that, of course, really improved the quality, the consistency of the beer.
That makes sense. But what about the taste? How did they adapt to those local palates?
Yeah.
Make something that people actually wanted to drink.
Well, it was a lot of experimentation, playing with the recipes, changing the bitterness, the alcohol content, even using local ingredients, like in India, where people were already used to drinks with a bit more of a kick. Brewers, they would often increase the alcohol content of their beers just to, compete with the local spirits.
So it wasn't just about acquiring a taste for something new. It was about, making beer that actually fit into that existing cultural landscape.
Exactly. And as these local brewing industries, matured and developed, they started to experiment even more. They created these unique styles that reflected those regional tastes and those local traditions. This was really big in Japan, where brewers have this reputation for innovation. They're known for creating beers that are both, distinctly Japanese, but also, celebrated globally.
So not only did beer become a part of these different cultures, but those cultures actually influenced the beer itself. It's a really cool example of how globalization, cultural exchange, it's a two-way street.
Absolutely. And it shows just how creative and adaptable brewers have been throughout history. They take this foreign product, they face these challenges, and in the process, create this whole new world of flavors and experiences.
We've talked a lot about the brewers' side of things, their innovations, all the challenges they faced. I'm curious about the consumers, though, the people actually drinking the beer. What made it so popular in these countries? Was it just about the taste? Or were there other things going on, social factors, cultural things at play?
That's a great point because, like we've been saying, taste is just one piece of the puzzle. In Asia, beer's popularity is really tied into these bigger social trends, cultural trends, even political trends.
Give us the inside scoop. What were some of those trends?
Well, one big factor was the association of beer with modernity and progress. You see, a lot of these Asian countries were going through rapid industrialization, urbanization in the late 19th, early 20th centuries. Beer was seen as a symbol of that new modern lifestyle.
So it was kind of like a badge of progress. Like, hey, I'm part of the in crowd.
Precisely. Drinking beer, it said something about you. It was cosmopolitan, forward-thinking, you were part of a new generation. And remember those early Japanese beer ads we talked about?
Right.
They were selling that image, that aspiration, just as much as they were selling the beer.
Makes you think about how our own relationship with what we drink might be shaped by those same forces, doesn't it?
For sure. It's always good to, think about that context, the cultural stuff surrounding what we consume.
It wasn't just about individual aspirations, though, was it? Beer also became really intertwined with national identity.
Oh, absolutely. As these nations kind of figured out their place in the world, beer became a way to show national pride, a way to set themselves apart from their past as colonies.
So in a way, choosing to drink a local beer, it was almost like a statement, like a quiet act of patriotism.
You could say that. Supporting your local industries, celebrating their successes, it was a big deal, especially in places like China, which, had a strong desire to kind of reclaim its identity after a period of foreign influence.
And this is where we see that contrast with India again, right?
Uh,
Where beer didn't quite have that same nationalistic feeling.
Exactly. India's journey with beer, it's always been more complex, shaped by things like Gandhi's movement, that colonial legacy.
It's credible. Just goes to show you, something as simple as a drink can be connected to history, culture, even politics in these really profound ways.
It really is. It's a good reminder that those things we might take for granted, like grabbing a beer with friends, well, they can have this whole backstory that's, surprisingly deep.
It makes you think, what will people say about our beer choices years from now? What'll be the big beer, way down the line? What will it say about, what we valued, how connected we were to the world, even, our thoughts on the environment?
Interesting. What will our IPAs and lagers tell those future folks? Something to think about, maybe over a pint.
Cheers to that. And to all of you listening, don't forget to subscribe to the show so you don't miss our next exploration of history and culture through, well, the bottom of a glass.